Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and respected professional and an author from Fort Worth, Texas, USA, Mr. Darryl DJ Heffline. DJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ash. Thanks for having me today, and I can say it's great to be with you.
Thank you. DJ is an author of a book titled Shifting Gears in the Crossroads, and you can see his book just behind him. We're going to focus our conversation about his book. So, DJ, my first question for you, what personal or professional moment first made you realize that shifting gears was not optional, but necessary in your own life?
So in the book, Ash, I talk about Jim, who is an entrepreneur and
Hmm.
who faces a wake-up call one day when he found himself standing on the outside looking into a business that he and a handful of colleagues had created. I had a similar experience, standing on the outside looking at a business that we created, and all of a sudden realizing that the dream had died and it was
Hmm.
time to move on.
Yeah.
That was my first revelation, my first major experience about facing the crossroads and then
Hmm.
having to figure out how to go through the crossroads.
Hmm. And the word crossroads is very central to your book. How do you define a true crossroads as opposed to a temporary setback or a bad season?
It's all about the sign. When you
Hmm.
get to an intersection, picture any intersection in any city, in any country in the world that could go two or three or four different directions.
Hmm.
There's usually a sign in that intersection. Oftentimes, it points in a forward direction, which encourages you to proceed to your destination.
Hmm.
Sometimes it talks about turning around and going back.
Hmm.
And there are times in life when we may reach major decisions
Hmm.
where we get to a sign where it's time to either progress forward or waste time looking at what's happened in the past.
Hmm.
So when you get to those intersections, you know it because there's a disruption, there's a sign, there's a chance to look forward, there's a chance to look back, and then the choice is ours. It's about cognitive reframing how we approach that, which determines our success as we go through that crossroads.
Hmm. Well said. You describe failure and the death of a dream as potential setups rather than setbacks. What helped you to see these in this manner?
Going back to my original example about the experience where I found myself on the outside looking in, part of my problem was when the crossroads came and the sign was there, I refused to look at it. I
Hmm.
refused to acknowledge it for some period of time. And it was one of those situations where the business was great. It was going, making money. There were customers lining up wanting to buy the product. And we had an internal struggle. There was a dispute over how the business would run and cash was management. All of a sudden, we imploded. And I didn't see that coming. I guess I did see it coming, but I didn't see it coming. So it was a difficult circumstance that I had to learn how to navigate. And then through that, I realized that there were a couple of things that I could do. I could sit there and be disappointed and
Hmm.
wallow in my sorrows, or go forward. And that's where I began to look forward,
Hmm.
thinking about, okay, sometimes that no isn't a permanent no and a defeat. It could be a setup for success. So what I learned going through that transition, and then I later write about in the book, the 4 phases of transformation and the 5 essential steps to build a compelling case for change.
Hmm.
Those were the things, the processes, the frameworks that I followed to go forward. And what I discovered as I went forward and looked at that forward pointing sign instead of the
Hmm.
one that was rearward pointing, there were greater opportunities out there that I never would have discovered had I not gone through that transition. So that could have been a bad thing. I could have shut down, quit,
Yeah.
like many people might do, but
Hmm.
I didn't, found the way forward. And then that's how I discovered, hey, there may be more than one path to
Yeah.
get me to where I want to go to.
Amazing. Many people know something is wrong, but delay taking action. What prevents people from recognizing the need to reposition sooner?
Fear of change. Fear of change or resistance to change. I don't know what it is about human beings. I won't talk about human beings in general. I'll talk about me. I I am resistant to change, even though I've been an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur, which is like getting into a career of
Yeah.
change. And
Mm.
I've done change inside and outside my life. I still don't like it. And I think generally people don't like change, and it's difficult for us to do that. And many times the only thing that'll motivate us to change is when the pain that we're experiencing is greater than our fear of change.
Mm.
That's when we decide to change. I think in general, people don't want to change. They don't like to change. They'll ignore it until the symptoms become so great that they're forced to do something about it.
Mm. But that is so true. Most of us as human beings love status quo or maybe status quo ante. But I just want to ask you one more question on this whole thing of repositioning. Why do you believe it's the most difficult and the most critical phase? And give me an example if you can.
So it gets back to the fear of change and recognizing the need, and then the fear of changing. If we can overcome that hurdle, and what I found when I went through my first crossroads, by the way, I've been through several throughout my personal and professional life.
Hmm.
Once we get through that first one, it's almost like there's learning, there's a cognitive experience that goes on.
Yeah.
The next one gets a little bit easier, but it's that first one that offers the greatest resistance, and it's almost like the law of inertia. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, and
Hmm.
and it's like that object is at rest, and you've got to exert a tremendous amount of force on it to get it rolling. But once it starts rolling, it's
Mm.
easier to keep it continuing, and that's the way it is in repositioning. Repositioning is all about recognizing the need for change, and
Yeah.
and when I talk about the 5 essential steps to build a compelling case for
Yeah.
change,
Mm.
all 5 steps occur within that reposition
Mm.
phase. And
Mm.
so it takes a little bit of time to not only recognize change, assess the current state, identify the future state, map out 1, 2, or 3 paths to get to
Mm.
that future state, and then make the right choice.
Great response. I'll come to the 4 Fs also in due course. But what emotional or psychological shifts typically happen when someone begins to re-emerge?
I think that, so by the time you get to reemerge, you've been through reposition and rebuild.
Mm.
By the time you get to reemerge, you now have momentum. You
Mm.
now have confidence. You now have some wins under your belt, and those
Mm.
wins will give greater confidence. And getting back to the science, the law, inertia, that object is now in motion, and it will stay at motion, and it takes less effort to
Mm.
keep it in motion. That's what's so ironic about the greatest reward is what happens when you get to reemerge and realize the
Mm.
latter of the 4 phases,
Mm.
and yet you have momentum then, and it almost seems easier then, and it's almost an oxymoron or contradictory to itself that early
Correct.
on the process is difficult, and then deeper into the process, the farther along you get, the easier it gets. But you build momentum, it gives you confidence, it gives you a safety factor, it gives you psychological belief in yourself and in your direction.
Mm.
I'm sure
Yes,
you've seen that in your life, Ash.
absolutely.
You don't get to where you are at without having gone through the
Oh,
crossroads
absolutely.
and built up some momentum.
I agree with you completely. You talk about faith, family, fitness, and finances as the 4 foundational building blocks. Tell me, why did you choose these 4?
I could have done 5 or 6. You're right. There's a lot more F's out there. Somebody says, why don't you put friends in there? I kind of group that in with family and friends. But those were the 4 essential areas that I found in my life were critical, and when properly balanced, would have given me that firm foundation to be able to go
Hmm.
forward.
Hmm.
So family is critically important. It's central to everything that we do. Um, Finances is critically important. I mean, we have to have resources
Yeah.
to fund our activities, and it's a lifeblood of sorts to us. It's our career, it's our business, and fitness is important too. We got to take care of our health, or we
Yeah.
won't be around to enjoy it. And then there's faith. Of the 4 building blocks, for me, faith not only is one of the foundational elements, but it's also what I would consider to be a cornerstone to
Hmm.
that foundation. In the book, I share a picture. It looks like a Jenga model.
Hmm.
Many people know the game Jenga, where you have these building blocks and you have a structure, and then each participant takes
Yeah.
one block out until till finally you get to that pivotal one where you remove it and the model collapses. It's the same thing around the 4Fs. Without one of those blocks, the model comes down.
Amazing. And based on all your work and your research and your experience, which of the 4 Fs do high achieving professionals most commonly tend to neglect?
So I think it's a combination of either faith or fitness. Mm-hmm. I know even in my own life, I've been a person of faith for 55 years. It's critically important, and faith gets interpreted differently.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different opinion of what their faith is like. But faith is critical, but it requires discipline and commitment for introspection, for slowing down and looking inside, meditating, praying, reading whatever source gives you strength. Busy professionals often let that go by the wayside with the right intentions to do it, but sometimes get so busy they don't. And then the faith area gets weak. And then, I would say that the fitness area is the other area that suffers a lot, and business professionals, maybe some of the high achievers, because who has time to work out? Who has time to exercise?
Correct.
And sometimes who has time to eat right, because you're traveling, you're in shows, you're meeting customers, and you're lavish dinners, fast food. So I think those two for high performers are hard. But I would also say that, sadly, I do believe that family can be a close second in terms of what might get neglected with high performance. And again, same reason, no malintent, just busy, not being present. And even I talk about that in the book, even give my own examples early on in the career when I was an entrepreneur and really just chasing the dream. My family suffered, and it showed. However, I later recovered and discovered that and recovered. But yeah, it could be that one as well.
Great response. Thank you. What advice would you give to someone who feels trapped in a role that no longer fits who they are becoming?
Create your own crossroads. Put yourself in a position where you forcibly put a sign in front of yourself. And part of the sign can point at your current role. And with your current role, there's pluses and minuses. There's things you like, there's things you don't like. Perhaps if you find yourself stuck, there's more that you don't like than you do like. Understand the pain and try to understand what it is about that role. Or if it's a business, what it is about that business you don't like. The one you created, maybe it's not doing what you wanted it to do. It has success it's want to do. Or your ministry. Any of those arenas, find yourself and understand why you're dissatisfied with your current state. Once you do that, begin to look forward and try to understand what good looks like. Paint the future. What are the things that you like to do that you aren't getting out of your current role, your current job, your business? What are the things that you are getting out of it? And as that becomes your criteria to start looking at painting out a future state. So force yourself to get into the crossroads, force yourself to look at the sign, rearward assessment, current assessment, but future projection, and start moving in that future direction.
Fascinating. Why do people so often choose the shortcut in life, even when they know or realize it may be unsafe or misaligned?
I think that it gets back to what they believe is the path of least resistance. And part of that least resistance is a resistance to change. In the book, I talk about Ted in the Crossroads. It's the metaphor that I use throughout the whole book. He gets himself into a situation where he has a choice. He has two paths to take. One is a shortcut. One really, and the shortcut really doesn't require much of a change. And it can be faster, but it's an unsafe shortcut. Or the other, it may take a little bit longer, but he can get to where he's going in a safe and still timely manner. He chooses the shortcut because at the end of the day, his failure is he didn't want to change, and he took the path of least resistance. And at the end, it was a very, very costly move. And in the case, without giving the secret of the book away, the story of the book away, in the case, it could have resulted in harm, injury, and even death of the people that were around him.
Yeah, yeah. What is the difference between perseverance and stubbornness when facing repeated obstacles?
I think it's the perspective going in and the perspective coming out or getting around those obstacles. I love the question, Ash, because Stubbornness and perseverance is what I faced in the example that I gave at the
Yeah.
beginning of our call today.
Mm.
I was both of them for a while. I thought I was persevering
Mm.
when I saw the need for change and yet didn't want to change.
Mm.
And in reality, what I was doing was being stubborn.
Mm.
The signs were there. They were pointing in the right direction. Deep down in, I knew I needed to change, but I was so committed to the vision. I was so passionate about what I did. I
Mm.
was so believing that in 2 weeks, things were going to get better. There's going to be
Mm.
another big order. There's going to be
Yeah.
more cash to fix the problems. So that fueled perseverance. But in reality, the patient was already dead.
Correct.
And I was just being stubborn and refusing to change. So I
Correct.
think that's the difference.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah. And that was something which caught my eye as well, because in the startup world, stubbornness could also result in not being able to pivot, which results in a problem for a startup founder as well. But this is a great example that you gave in your book. Thank you.
Well said. Well said, Ash.
My next question is, how can people measure success during transition without failing back into old definitions of achievement?
So as you're painting the picture of what good looks like, the future state, what I talk about in the book is being clear about what good looks like and being clear about what the path looks like to get to good, to get from reposition all the way to realize. And it's not difficult, but it will take a little introspection and slow down, close the door, think and meditate a little bit about what the future looks like, because in every phase of transition, there's a certain profile of what your family looks like, what your faith looks like, what your fitness looks like, what your finances look like. And at the end of the day, if you're moving toward your vision, and we talk about how to write a vision and moving toward your mission, vision's what you want to be, mission's what you want to do, but it's all based on the 4 foundational principles. It's understanding what each of those foundational areas look like at each phase of transition. Once you map that out, and you may not know it exactly day one, but at least put something down and then modify, change it as you go through.
Yeah.
But once you get that roadmap and that criteria for each stage laid out, you can then be a little bit more confident and relaxed as you proceed. You can see, as you check the boxes in each phase, how you're moving through the continuum and you're going from phase to phase, and you can get confidence about feeling that you're on the right path.
Well said. We spoke about repositioning a few minutes back, and I want to come back with one more question for you on that. Many leaders tie their identity closely to their role or their title. How does this attachment make repositioning more difficult?
Oh man, so for me that was probably core of my problem. I found myself on the outside looking in, and the biggest loss that I processed was the loss of my identity. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. I mean, the crossroads were there. I had to make a change. I had to get from, get rid of the stubbornness and get a little bit more proactive. And I didn't know what to do to change. And that was the most difficult thing about being in that phase was knowing that I needed to change and start mapping out the process for doing that. But it was difficult, and psychologically and emotionally, I realized that I was really getting my identity from what I was doing, and now all of a sudden that went away, and I had to rediscover who I was. But the good news is I did find a path forward.
Yeah.
The principles I learned then and in subsequent Crossroads experiences is what I share in the book, the process, the tools, the downloadable tools, relatable models. And it became something that since then I've been able to share and mentor folks that were in similar situations. I've used the principles in business settings and startups and turnarounds. And it became a positive force in my future. But I had to realize that my identity is not in my job.
Yeah.
It really is in who I am, in my faith, and the balance in the 4 F's. And oh, by the way, along the way, I would like to progress and my career or business or ministry or the things that I do, but never find my identity in any of them. And any and all of them could be great, could be good, could be noteworthy, but shouldn't find my identity in that.
Well said. I have time for two more questions for you. What would you say to someone who knows they need to change, but are still afraid to let go of where they are today?
Take the polar plunge. You see these videos on all the social media of, I don't know if you've seen any. I see them all the time of people in the middle of winter, deciding to go into an icy water, and it's called the polar plunge. They do it on a dare. Can you do it? And jump in. And I'm from the northeastern part of the United States originally, born and raised there, where it was very cold and the winters were cold. And the ice or the lakes would freeze over and snow, and it was heaven. And I'm reminded of one day when I was skating on a frozen pond, playing ice hockey, and I fell through the ice.
Wow.
It was cold. It was scary. It was cold. I just remembered the shock to my system. I ended up being sick for 2 weeks afterwards, but there was a tremendous shock for the system. I think in a positive way, that's what folks that are feeling stuck need to find a way to do. It takes spiritual balance, introspection. You have to believe in it, but sometimes you just have to take the polar plunge, realize it's going to be a jolt and it's going to be cold, but your belief in the future has to be greater than your fear of change or being stuck. And when that point is reached, take the polar plunge, you'll get through it and be better off for it.
Oh, amazing. And my last question for you, if your book could save a reader from making one major mistake at their crossroads, what would you want it to be?
I'll say that in two ways.
Sure.
Number one, whatever path forward, however the reader would move through the 4 phases, always be sure to achieve balance in the 4 foundational lives. Because if you achieve quote unquote success, but lose your family and lose your health, lose your faith, and even lose your financial bearing, what do you really have? The second thing that I would say was I would focus on the subject of faith, because of the 4 I mentioned earlier, it's a cornerstone. It's been a cornerstone with me. And what I discovered 55 years ago when I began my faith journey, I have gotten sources of wisdom, sources of strength. When the negative thoughts come to mind as you're going through the crossroads, and they will, the thoughts that say, you can't do it. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not good looking enough. You're not popular enough. You're not articulate enough. Those negative thoughts are going to come. And it's what you do in response to those negative thoughts that determines your success. That's where the faith element comes in. Strong cornerstone of faith, introspection, belief, prayer, in my case, reading the Bible, getting and the Bible's loaded with all kinds of positive truths in my case. Getting those truths into mind, strengthening that faith element will also better position any of the readers, listeners, into being successful as those negative thoughts come on as they go down the path. Those 2 things are what I would reflect on.
Amazing. And on that note, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been, DJ. You're clearly a very, very good storyteller. And I just love the way you have in your book, Shifting Gears in the Crossroads, drawn upon so much wisdom from your own life. And you've really been able to figure out what were some of your own milestones, and you've shared those lessons with us. You spoke about faith, and at the end of it, what's most important when it comes to faith is the belief that this too shall pass. And I think that is something which comes out very strongly in what you've said and spoken to me about today. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
And thank you, Ash. Enjoyed our time together today.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.